It's not exactly festive down here. And someone just said to me the other day, you know, I don't need to get a high distinction through this lockdown process. Just getting through is sufficient. So yeah, thank you everybody for being here today and bringing your embodiment and time for this process. And Kate sort of mentioned the blurb, and that looks like we have a lot to do when you look at all those questions that I put forward there. So let's see how we go with that. But definitely this intention around kindling inner warmth. And some words that have been coming to me lately around meditation practice is that it's really something that we are exploring, opening to, we could say, that can't be claimed or known by force, you know, by aggression, by force, by the sort of striving mind. Rather it's something I think that's opened by a curiosity, a very sometimes deep willingness to put aside as much as we can for a while judgment, to look openly, to look with love, and openness, and it opens through the time where we're willing to give it, and through approaching it in this other way. So I think it's very important to not get too professional about our meditation practice. It needs commitment for sure, and interest, but a sort of professional approach to our meditation practice, I think, is sort of steering us off into another strange road of one of the other shadows of modernity. So I do think this way of relating with ourselves, not relating with ourselves as like a human resource, what can I get out of this, but as a human being, is an anecdote in a sense to what I said, the shadows or maybe the cracks in modernity or contemporary culture, which are being, I think, very highlighted right now in sometimes, you know, pretty alarming, sometimes quite painful way to watch. So we could say, in a sense, in this capitalistic contemporary culture, that sometimes, you know, it can flatline us all a little, can sort of reduce us, we could say, into consumers, or into a frenzied pace, you know, into a image on the Facebook, that there can be a, you know, in the speed sometimes with which we live, there can be a disembodiment, almost an encouragement to come up into the mind and to not be in the whole feeling body. That sometimes we are encouraged, you know, through the social media to be spectators, you know, which can kick in the comparing mind that can take us out of the richness of the moment of the life we're actually occupying. And I think, you know, we sort of know it can alienate us at times from our very basic connection and our utter dependency on the network we live within, you know, the sun and the rivers and the trees and each other, all of which that we would just simply not be here with if that was not here. Now, I really like Octavio Paz. He's one of my really dear writers that I love, a Mexican writer. And he spent quite a lot of time as the ambassador for Mexico and India. Wrote beautiful love poems, if you ever want to check him out, Octavio Paz. And he said, you know, the modern man sometimes seems to forget that that we are not a machine. You know, this doesn't particularly relate to all of us here, but on a sort of wider view, we're not a machine, but we're an organic being that came from our mother's womb. You know, we came out covered in white, sticky stuff. Some of you probably know what that's called. I've seen that on your children. But you know, incredibly creative, incredible. You know, I also often, you know, draw again on Tim Winton. Him speaking about, you know, it's as if here he's speaking more about men in contemporary culture have been trained to endure and to fight and to repress empathy. He speaks about sometimes boys having the tenderness shamed out of them, and a concern he has in our modern culture of all that we've burnt out, we've kind of clear-felled, we've interrogated, you know, things that once held us in place, you know, certain traditions in the church and spiritual traditions that maybe once held us, and also, you know, notions of fixed gender that once maybe seemed kind of really stable. You know, so much of this has been interrogated for very good reason, but has also kind of left this gap. And that we could say sometimes in our modern culture there has been a spiritual impoverishment, you know, that's sort of expressed in the way we're related to nature, expressed in the way we can, you know, cut off empathy and sort of see life and as more transactional and that economic rationalism. What can I get out of this? What is the monetary value that could allow us to, you know, blow up a sacred site in this country for monetary gain? Or could put a price on a whale, you know, that this whale is worth this much money, and then, well, if I don't get it, then somebody else will, so we've got to keep it moving. You know, this whole way of seeing. So I'm very aware that all of you here, I know in your own ways, have deeply addressed, have been addressing this gap of some kind of gap in our spiritual, we could say, connection to life, and probably acutely aware of some of those shadows I'm talking about. So I don't feel like I'm saying anything new here. You know, I felt the passion in this whole configuration of people. So I think, in that sense, the meditation practice where we're wanting to enter our subjectivity and our interiority and a felt experience, to feel ourselves, to foster our capacity to feel life, and then to respond. We think of any ethics that are put forward in any religion is honing our capacity to feel what's happening around us and respond in a way that doesn't cause more harm and perpetuate sufferings of cycles of suffering. And I think and I imagine you'll agree because you're here, but the Buddha offers a very comprehensive map into this humanness. And, you know, he offers his map just one man through his own experience and through his own deep questioning around what is a nourishing life, and through his own heartache, his own heartbreak, pretty much had nervous, by anyone's account, you know, some nervous breakdowns along the way. Seriously, I think that's what you would term some of them. You know, and then came to some very deep understanding and offered us this map. You know, how do we want to live, as the poet Mary Oliver says, this one precious life. So be looking a little bit at those teachings from the Buddha and this teaching on metta, loving kindness. Sometimes that word loving kindness, we can hear it and it can sort of sound a little bit weak, you know, this loving kindness, but really what is the power of loving kindness? What's the potency, the transformative energy of loving kindness? We'll be looking at a little bit. Something that is encouraged to start within. And it's interesting, the Buddha says how necessary it is to be able to bring warmth within. That's sometimes very challenging. And then from there to start to radiate it out wider and wider and wider and wider till it becomes something that's quite measureless. where we are bringing more and more people into our frame of awareness, out of obscuration into a felt relationship, you know, deeper than the stereotype, the assumption, or the image. But, you know, and I think meditation and art is something that can really help us with this, because it really brings the interior of someone forward in a way you just cannot reduce, you know. So it's just a few more words, and we will be then diving in just to practice for most of the day together. So I'm just setting up a context here. Yeah, one thing I've been doing, my sort of main orientations in life have been, you know, with words as a writer, as a way to sort of wake myself up, and then also through the dharma. And in this lockdown, I've been reading some old stories that I wrote, you know, sometimes to delight, sometimes to I think you got to think that was a little heavy with words there, Jess. So, you know, you start to get my own mind on my work, as we do. But one line has stayed with me that feels relevant today, and it's connected to a story set in San Francisco. And I was there for some time studying texts at Spirit Rock over a number of years, and befriended a woman there. She was a Native American woman from the Wintu tribe. She rode a motorbike, and she took me around San Francisco exploring all the queer communities there, where I learned as much as I learned probably at Spirit Rock, I'd say. Anyway, she sort of ended up, which she knew, featured in a story, though sort of ended up, it was not me, but somebody else, with a man coming to meet her. Anyway, and at one point, one of the characters says to her, you know, and he says, I understand when someone does something to you and they don't feel you. When someone does something to you and they don't feel you, it can feel terrible. You know, sometimes you don't want to get out of bed. You just like to roll over. This sense of when we're reduced or objectified, how that can feel to the human being. And I think that is something so deep, that the Brahma Viharas and metta is wanting to undo the tendency that we can sometimes see, that Tim Winton was talking about a little bit, in a patriarchal culture, or toxic masculinity, it's sort of been termed now, another one of the woke kind of statements, is when we look at something in order to power over, where we're wanting to reinstate our territory, where we're wanting to almost assert our identity. And inherent in that mode of being is some a way of handling the inevitable insecurity of life, a way of a fear of vulnerability, sort of fear of innocence or openness. I think a suspicion or a fear of the feminine nature, or the wild nature of things that we have to reduce, to not meet, to own, or to claim by force. And so this practice, where we are learning to relate to life and ourself deeper than our protective mechanisms, deeper than our strategies or our agendas, in a more naked way. And so when we are confronted by the wildness of life, or by all the stimuli that has been around lately, you know, the Buddha would put forward, there's sort of 3 ways that we habitually respond, that we'll be looking at today. 3 ways we can respond is we just don't want to, what's uncomfortable for us, we just want to turn away, we just want to push it away. You know, we just don't want it. Think of our own inner life, you know, when we're in heat, when we're feeling awkward, or we're feeling insecure, or we're just feeling irritable, all of these things that I think are a part of the lockdown experience. You know, what do we then start sort of adding extra suffering to? I just don't want that, you know. Or what we can do, you know, when we feel the inevitable insecurity of life, then we want to start to assert ourselves. We want to pull things towards us, that wanting, that grasping, you know, as if I get that, or find myself there, or if I be this person, that somehow I will then be okay. Or the third thing is that we can just sort of space out. We just got to space out when things get hot. You know, these are all survival strategies, way of you know, dealing with life. And the Dharma, in wanting us to, I think, know our seed as a human being, that we have more capacity than this to actually meet experience, to meet the rawness of experience with some ground. That takes foundations and time. That there is a way of seeing, that there's a way of seeing inside of us that is deeper than concepts or the mind. That we can drop into something. It's called many different names in many different spiritual traditions, and I think we all feel it sometimes when we're seeing clearly. Where there is a life's eyes, one of my teachers used to say, we're seeing with like eyes that are not blurred by our own sort of thinking processes, our own overlays. There's like direct, sometimes ruthless sort of perception, clarity, Vajra mind, Vajra meaning crystal clear. And that this way of seeing is not something we can construct or manipulate. It just starts coming. It's just sometimes there, sometimes not there when we're really busy. Okay, and then just a few more words just before we just dive in. Setting it up a little bit, just so you know, we're clocking the whole territory, the context we're practicing in. I think, you know, and again, I'm saying things that have been spoken, and then we're going to move into the interior. I think, again, talking about the cracks of our culture and what's been so painfully, clearly highlighted with COVID-19 is, I wonder, maybe you felt this, I don't know, I've been quite amazed that the whole world, and you know, and aware some people are now moving out, aren't in lockdown, but the whole world has been able to come to a fiery halt to protect lives. You know, I do think it's interesting when you do look around and you do see the countries that are faring better have had feminine leadership. It's interesting that maybe the lives are more important than the economics. So that also needs to be beautifully handled, and we need such good, rich minds on this. That's interesting. And so we're seeing, you know, one of my friends said, you know, imagine if the environmental crises had the same publicist as COVID-19. And we've also seen all of the lives around the world that have not met with that same fierce response and protection from the state. And in that, we have seen an arising and an outrage and a demand to be seen in clearer, appropriate view and not reduced. And we've seen the Black Lives Matter protests all around the world. And we had these in Melbourne, tens and thousands of us standing up in the street for Indigenous lives, for the deaths in custody that were needing deeper inquiry, with a strong sense of the systematic racism that had allowed for some neglect there. So yeah, all of this, very powerful, you know, very distressing, watching all of us, you know, George Floyd's death. So, you know, all of this, I think we all feel it's strong on the human being to metabolize what's going on, to stay with it. And just all of us, some of us now in lockdown, what that evokes, you know, just for any human being, to not be able to see family or loved ones, to not be able to embrace, to cuddle, you know, people that have had children in this time, people who have lost loved ones in this time. I think of you, you know, so So just what's going on internally, in the inner life in lockdown, has its challenges. Sometimes, highlights our own minds, and sometimes, highlight the vulnerabilities in our own minds. And it's a powerful process, So just sort of saying that today too, that whatever your experience is, so we're not going for high distinctions here in this lockdown, just going to be able to meet the truth of our experience and to look at this judging mind. If we say metta, this movement of warmth in the heart, sort of opposite sometimes is sometimes known as Buddha's dark shadow, his twin Mara, come in to undermine. I encourage us, if today we can put down judgment, just we'll notice it if it's here, and just to see, just to openly see and feel our experience, as if we were almost just sitting by a river, or we were sitting under a rose apple tree. That was where the Buddha sort of recovered from his, I'd say, mental disturbance. And so I thought, before we dive in, we're about to dive into practice now for the day. In the morning I'll give some instructions for the first sit, and then it will be more quiet for you to find your own way. The walking won't be instructed. They are, I think they're half an hour or 15-minute periods. I'll ring you back in for those. So we'll mute ourselves for the walking, and then we'll ring the bells to bring you back in. So what I thought we'd do now, when there has been alarm around and there's heat in the being, it's, it can very quickly evoke a sense of unsafety in the being. And we don't even sometimes realize that, that somehow we are still, we're somewhere sort of trying to cope. So I just thought, and we all have in us, these fight, flight sort of responses to stimuli that moves inside of us. Our nervous systems can get wound up. So I just encourage you now, before we start, if you just want to look around your room where you are, just check out the space you're in, and we can just see, actually, we're in a very safe environment here. Yeah. You just look around, just look, see where you are. The nervous system gets very tricky with the mind when it feels, under threat. So one of my teachers used to say, look, as you all go deep, I'm here. Any wild animals come, I've got them. You're okay. You can relax. So just moving your eyes around a little bit in your own way. You start to see this and start to think, wow, I have this roof over my head, and this gratitude, these blessings, really, to be able to be a human being in a home.